Welcome to the Winning Wellness Podcast, where we explore health, wellness, performance, and try to improve not only your quantity of life, but your quality of life. I'm your host, Mitch Schwartzman.
Hi, everyone. Today we're welcoming Dr. Denise Ford, who is a teacher at North Kirkwood Middle School in Kirkwood, Missouri. And I kind of came across her. My wife's an educator in a different school district, and there was a meeting that she had, and she sort of came home and she said, "You've got to have this lady on your podcast, like just figure it out." So my wife knows that I enjoy learning, and I kind of pride myself on being a lifelong learner. And she's aware of the material that I kind of enjoy taking in. And so it wasn't even a long conversation. She just said, reach out to her and kind of figure it out. You won't regret it. So, and Dr. Ford has been really gracious with email exchanges and accepting phone calls and sharing some of her materials, and even so generous to actually give us some more time today. So, Dr. Ford, if you could give us a little background, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Sure. So I've been teaching for a long time. I got my bachelor's and master's from Mizzou in the previous century. I think I can tell you. I got my gifted certification here in town at Maryville University, and I went back to get my PhD at UMSL, and then I went back again to get certification in mind, brain, and learning at Drexel University. So I like you say about you as well, Mitch, I'm a lifelong learner. I can't get enough, and I've always been fascinated by the brain, but that's I guess why I went to get my specialization and certification from Drexel. But ever since then, I've just been at a whole new level of excited about the brain and learning.
Yeah, and that's that gifted specialty in the middle school era. Back in the day, I was lucky enough to kind of slide through the cracks and find myself as a student in that scenario. And it can change and impact you. It made a big change, big impact. I remember the memories I have of middle school, they basically 95% of them occur in that class. And it was only like 10 or 15% of my week, but you're in a position to make really big impact. And I would love to talk about that. I've got some children at home, and I have college age students to work with. So I'm sure that the lessons that you're working on with them might branch out to those age groups as well. But just the learning, we all need to be learning. We all need to be growing. And you just gave us a little time capsule of a couple of different roles and education completions. But how do you define your current role or roles?
I guess my primary role, professionally at least, is that I am a gifted specialist in a middle school. I'm lucky enough to get to do a lot of professional development as well, which means I get to work with teachers and give suggestions. I'm also an adjunct professor at UMSL now, and I teach a course on the educational role of play. So play is really important to me for all grade levels. I guess my passion is with the brain and gifted, but looking back, I've taught pretty much everything. I've taught everything from parents as teachers, home visits with birth to 3-year-olds, and I've gone all the way up to, like I said, teaching graduate course at UMSL and everything in between. But right now, yes, my primary role is as a gifted specialist at a middle school. So I teach social studies to gifted students at our middle school.
So you've worn so many hats, and one of the things I was kind of blown away at was on our phone conversation is that you have done a little bit of everything. You've been able to see snapshots of the brain in different age groups and maturation points and things like that. And so I think that lends itself to a really special perspective. And I hope that we can make this. I'm sure we will, but I hope that we can make this conversation how parents might view their children and how young learners might view themselves and so on, and how to keep the aging brain learning and things like that. But before we get into that, can we talk more about this UMSL class with the play focus? Because for me, that has you just set off some alarms of like interest. So like I've got like a little list of questions, but I'm gonna put those aside. Please talk to us about this play phenomenon and what the deal is there.
You know, in one of the books that we use for the course, one of the authors is quoted as saying, the opposite of play is not work. The opposite of play is depression. And it's about the idea that all of us need to play, all of us. And obviously we can take the lead from our youngest members of our society because they've got the play thing figured out and they know how to play. The question is, when do we take that out of the school curriculum? And should we? Obviously, if you ask me, no, we should never take it out. You're never too old to play. And play is what helps keep us young. So play is such a vital thing. Obviously, our children learn through play, but our brains are meant to play. If you think back, anytime I wonder anything about the brain, throughout all of my studies, I always think back to what was the brain doing 10,000 years ago? Because in evolutionary time, 10,000 years is like a snap of the finger. If the brain was doing it 10,000 years ago, then it still should be doing it now for the health of the brain. That's why play is a thing. Play is a thing among the animal kingdom, among the humans. We need to play. And I really worry that we're bringing this pressure on our teachers of the 4-year-olds, 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds. And you got to get the kids ready for school, get them ready for better test scores, get them ready for whatever else. I would suggest, why don't we just let them play more? And play, to be truly play, needs to be self-directed. So we have to just let the kids play. And that's never time that's not well spent if the kids are playing. So I'm obviously very partial on this topic, but even in middle school, I search for ways to make sure I can keep things playful and let my students have a chance to just immerse themselves in other worlds. That's a great way to play. And we do that when we read, but we need to do that of our own volition as well. And obviously that's great for the brain.
Yeah, outstanding. I spent some time as not exactly the exact same definition of play, but pretty close. I spent some time as a play therapist when I was working on I was working on a counseling degree. So I was an intern. I wasn't fully licensed, but I was under supervision. And in play therapy, in this setting, we worked with pediatric clients. We worked with ages 4 to 18. And about a third of the young children that we had come in that needed some help with their families, the dynamics, something just needed a little bit of help, whether it was severely disruptive or just the parents wanted a little bit of help. About a third of those families, my supervising counselor, he just say that these parents don't let their kids play. There's either too much structure and too much rules. It's not that the kids aren't playing and doing like entertaining, fun little things. Mm-hmm. It's that everything is structured and everything has like a little like color inside the lines kind of thing. And I just thought that's something that that just struck me, it was about, of the clients we saw, it was about a third of the children were never using their imagination and were never growing their skill sets. A third of them had maybe something traumatic occur to them, like fill in the blank. And then the other third, their parents were perfectionists, and then they were children who were trying to be perfectionists. And so as a parent, I kind of think like, how often, because I'm playful, I like to go home and like I love these little kids. I've got a newly 6-year-old daughter and a fairly newly 4-year-old son. They've been mine the whole time, but they are just now turning 6 and 4. But they're a blast, and I love playing with them. But I remind myself through that self-directed play, I remind myself, back off, ask them what they want to do. And at this point, they've been playful and like a little bit more aware for the last few years. So I've had a few years of practice, so it's not like a daily battle. But early on, when they were like 2, 3, 4, it was really enticing to just say, here's this game, we can do this, here are the rules. But if you let them just like run free, like magical things happen. It's really cool.
Good for you for letting them take the lead. I think that's the secret, and that's really hard for us to do. Yeah. But if we let them take the lead, and sometimes the best thing we can do is not even be involved in the play, or if we are involved, let them lead us where they want to go. And we think we know better, but honestly, the experts on play are kids about the age of your kids at home. So yeah, good for you.
it's a lot of fun to just I'm a guest on the show. I'm not the director. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. But play, and you look at your education career that you just gave us a snapshot of. How do you keep yourself in play in maybe those more academic settings? Or do you have any advice for maybe the middle school kids that you're working with now? Or maybe I have a bunch of college athletes and they don't always love school. What do we do for maybe those younger ages, or just the grown-ups who are out there that need to play? Any advice for them?
How often do we hear people say they don't love school for whatever reason, but you never hear somebody say, I don't love learning. And I think there's the big difference. Learning feeds us. Learning something new truly, physiologically, gives you a jolt of dopamine. When you learn something new, it's exciting. Even if you're not consciously aware at the moment, it's exciting. So learning is fun. We have to make sure that we let our students realize there's school, but that entails so many things, but it's the learning that's exciting. So if we're failing them, then we're failing them and letting them realize, having the opportunities for more and more learning in their lives. But it doesn't matter if you're in school or out of school, you're athletes at your university or anywhere else. Go learn new things, try something you've never done before. I would even suggest, for the athletes, try something in a way you haven't done before. I just finished reading Adam Grant's latest book, on hidden potential. And he's got a whole section there on how, I forgot the guy's name now, but he actually advised Steph Curry. And Steph Curry was like not even enjoying basketball when he was underrated. They said he was too short. They said he couldn't move quickly enough. And he knew if he did certain drills, he could do better, but he was just so bored doing the drills. He hired this guy whose name escapes me. And the guy turned the drills into play. And once he started playing, he started working out more and more. But I would recommend your athletes check out this guy. I don't know if the guy's written a book or not, but read Adam Grant's chapter on that, because all of us just need to make things a little more playful. You can make things competitive, but the number one issue he kept talking about was it's not as much fun to compete. It is fun to compete against other people, but it's really fun to make it playful to compete against yourself. So with Steph Curry, he would do things like, how many of these can you run and get the ball, go back to the half court line, come back to the next spot, take a shot, go back, get the ball, run to the half court line, take a shot, and how many can you do in 60 seconds? How many can you do in a minute and 20 seconds? There were different parameters they would keep changing up, and then Steph Curry was trying to get more shots in a certain amount of time than he had the day before. So he's competing against himself, and then the thrill of beating that and getting a higher number the next time was jolting his dopamine, I guess. But it's just a way to make what could it be just a drill and blah, blah. Who wants to do that? It made it much more exciting because he made it into a game.
Yeah. We have one of the 4 pillars or values of the department that I work in right now, which is the Lindenwood University Athletic Performance. One of our pillars is that we want them to enjoy it. We want them to just come in, and we emphasize that they have a will-do attitude, is that they're invested, is that they give 100%, and that they have fun. So we're in here just challenging and constantly pursuing that fun. And the last thing before we kind of move on there is, you talked about the caveman brain a little bit. This is one of the references that I'm making on a really regular basis. So it's something I talk to my athletes about. I teach a stress management course over at over at Maryville University. Pardon me.
Okay.
And I'm like a broken record. I tell people, like, our hardware and our software is designed for caveman days. Like, this world we live in now is foreign. Like, this is not how we're meant to be. And when you talk about play, I also think about, like, that's what, like, lion cubs do, is they play with each other to learn how to fight and how to hunt. And, like, that's just so important. I know I see that in my children at home, is like, I'm pretty rigid, or I was, and I'm still to a point about, if they're going to watch TV, I would keep that violence out of there. It doesn't matter. They I mean, to a degree, I'm sure it matters. But my son would just come home. He'd rip a piece of paper into the shape of a gun, and you're like, no, or he would just want to fight and just do that stuff. Like, well, we haven't been doing that stuff. Like, but he would just pick up, and it's just natural to him. He just
It is.
there's that like, you know, guttural primal need to be violent and to practice some of that stuff. And he's got it. My daughter's got it. Is that they just want to play, and they bring it up, and it's just the most natural thing.
It is. And we, in my course that we talk about, we spend a good deal of time talking about the controversy of rough and tumble play. A lot of schools, for whatever reason, because we're a very litigious society now, a lot of schools are very fearful of kids. Keep your hands to yourself. Keep your hands to yourself. But if you look at our animal kingdom, there's something that's different in the, and we pick up on it instinctually in how our pupils are dilated. We know when someone's goofing around with us and when someone's got seriously bad intent for us. And so when kids are engaged in rough and tumble play, it's so healthy for them. But we've gone so far to the other extreme where we really try to forbid that to ever happen. So I do worry about, especially our boys, I think I worry because they have a primal need to play in that way. And we have to give them the outlet. Our schools, for like I said, for a variety of reasons, aren't able to provide that a lot. But hopefully at home, they're still getting some time.
Yeah, we value it. We know that they love it, and there's been some little. I haven't like read a research paper on it, but there's been some little statistic floating around the internet lately where oxytocin is highest in children when they're cuddling up with their mom, and highest when they're like battling and wrestling around with their dad. So it kind of feeds into some of the roles, and there's been times that my wife is like a little concerned. I say like listen to them, like they're laughing, and they back off, and then they come back at me at 120%. So like it's like they are drawn to it. I might agitate it every once in a while, like a little poke in the ribs or something. But they're really into it. And just I take him to like wrestling practice, and just the idea of it is just all really, it just flows with kind of how he's wired. I only have one son. I've only shared a house with one little boy, so I only know him, so I can't speak for everybody.
Right.
But that's how he is, and without me telling him to, like, I'm not telling him to be tough or to hit me. I'm not telling him any of that stuff. He just wants to play and be rough. He wants to practice fighting, almost as if he comes from 1,000 generations of humans who had to fight to survive. So,
and guess what? He does.
Yeah. So go figure.
Yeah.
Okay. So we want to make the experience, learning is going to be facilitated through play. We want to make that a little bit more fun. How do you do that? If you've got, what is sixth grade? Like, you've got like 12 to 14-year-olds. Is that kind of the age window?
11 and 12, sixth grade, all the way up to 14-year-olds in eighth grade. Yeah.
Okay. What is fun for that age group? It's been it's been a little while.
Well, middle school is a very unique time for so many reasons. It's a very self-centered time, and that's not meant to be an insult toward middle schoolers. Again, evolutionary wise, you had to be self-centered in order to survive through those years. You have to, because it's a risk-taking time in your life, and you've got to be looking out for number one to get through all the risk-taking behavior that was part of our long heritage. So it's a very self-focused time. So pretty much anything that's about them makes them very happy. But it also, I shouldn't just say that's the only thing. They're very altruistic kids also. I will tell you, middle school kids are very honest. So they just like to be playful. I think in general, if I could ask teachers to kind of change a few things, it would obviously be know more about the brain and how it learns, but it would also be, let's not take everything so seriously. We can just be a little lighthearted. And, if someone doesn't quite learn something, then they just will learn it later, or maybe they won't. But we just can't take every single moment so seriously. And I think our students pick up on how seriously we're taking each little event. So I try to keep things playful, spontaneous, And we can talk about more things about the brain, but when you keep things, surprise is a great thing, and our kids love it, and teachers can employ that technique quite a bit. But I think that's also playful, and then just giving them opportunities to use their imagination to do something else, to just go off the path, to be more metaphorical, just do different things that are going to see things from 20 different angles than they might normally go. And again, why not take their lead? Not just the 4 and 6-year-olds at your house, but let's take the kids' lead more often too. They still know a lot more about play than we do at that age.
Yeah. And we, to pull it back into my crowd, and I already talked about my department once, I'll just bring it up again, is that part of our mission statement is to develop leaders. And so it's a really low-hanging fruit that a month or two into the year, you just say, Johnny or Sally, you're leading warm up today. Like you've seen it a dozen times, you've seen it 20 times. Like it's your turn. And so we can't always take their lead on everything, but I can say you've got warm up, or we can say I want you to squat today, but do you want to squat like a front squat or a back squat or like a Bulgarian, or how do you want to execute this pattern? So we do try to take that as well. And then I really like what you said there about the surprise. The brain likes to be surprised, and I'm not doing stand-up comedy. Hopefully I never end up doing that for everyone. But when I've heard people talk about like jokes before, is that the surprise, it like excites the brain in a unique. That's why you get people who have like uncontrolled laughter, is that they weren't prepared for what was going to come out, and it caught them off guard. And and we can all think of like a funny joke that we heard maybe years ago, or that punchline, or maybe we don't deliver it as well, but there's that surprise. It just,
Right.
it does stick with you. So I never really thought about the surprise factor as far as learning, but if you just think about a little bit of like humor, that's exactly what's happening, is you remember it because it's not what you were expecting.
Yeah, I often say that brain thrives off consistency. It survives off consistency, but it thrives off surprise. And I think the brain's a natural pattern seeker. Without even wanting to, we are always noticing patterns. It's how we survived. Again, are we becoming a broken record? But from all those thousands of years ago, we survived by noticing when there's been a break in the pattern for whatever reason. And that's what humor does. It breaks the pattern. Whether you realize it or not, subconsciously, you kind of thought you knew where the story was going, and then suddenly it took a turn, and that catches us off guard, and we love that. So, and that's the humor and the surprise of it.
Yeah. What was your
I say
saying
that
right at the beginning?
it survives off consistency, but it thrives off surprise. You have to have both. And again, how horrible would our lives be if it was constantly up in the air? So we do have to have consistency to a certain point. It makes us feel safe, but we need those jolts of surprise, and the unexpected needs to happen now and then too.
I know that you know a little bit more about the physiology of the brain, and some of like the inner workings of that. Well, what are some things that you have come across that sort of help you teach people about the brain and about learning?
Well, I'll tell you that my mantra has been, for a teacher not to know how the brain learns, at least somewhat. I read it one time that a person said it is equivalent to a cardiologist saying, I really like you and want you to be healthy, but I have no idea how the heart works. And that's sort of what we do as teachers if we don't have at least a rudimentary knowledge of truly what happens when the brain learns. I don't know that you need to know exactly what happens neurobiology, but you do need to know that, for example, we need to know that we have in our neuron, and I can share a diagram with you, but in the neuron, the signals are going to pass from the dendrites all the way through the neuron and out the terminal buttons at the other end, out the axon, and make a jump to the next neuron. And in order to make those signals pass, the dendrites are constantly looking for something. They're looking for something they're reaching out to find a signal that they can take from another neuron. And I saw this amazing image that was part of Barbara Oakley's TED Talk years ago, but she showed the dendrite of an actual human being, the little bitty dendritic spikes. And then they showed the same slide of the same human being's brain after a night of sleep and a bout of learning, and there was growth. The dendritic spikes had grown. They were different. And that was one night. After one day of learning and an evening of sleep, the dendritic spikes had changed. And I love showing this image because you truly change the brain. It's not just a phrase we use. You absolutely physiologically change the brain when you learn. And once those dendritic spikes pop up and you maintain your learning, then they become stronger. And then obviously you end up learning something for the long term. But every time when I'm talking to my students and I tell them things, and I'll say, if you didn't know those things that I just said, your brain is changing. It's changing right now. And that's just, I mean, how cool is that? How much power is that? And for teachers and parents to know they have that level of power, but for the brain owner to know that they have that level of power, that I can learn and I can make my own brain change and I can make the decision to make that brain change or not. I mean, that's just amazing. So I think that's the coolest thing about brain anatomy that I like to share is how the dendritic spikes go. And notice I mentioned it was really important to have a bout of sleep. We can talk about that more, but I think sleep is one of the most underrated tools we have in our arsenal. And I'm sure you see this with college students. I definitely see it with my middle school students. We're really, we're neglecting that quite a bit. I think we're getting past the point in our society where it used to be a badge of honor to brag about not sleeping much. But I think we're getting better about that. You have to sleep. Your brain's more active when you're asleep than when you're awake. And when you're asleep, that's when all the stuff you've learned can consolidate and get organized and then be able to be used the next day. So get those dendritic spikes growing, we have to sleep more.
Yeah. We and our athletes have to perform in the classroom as well. But they also quite a few of their movements are more neurological. So it's the muscles that move your body, but the speed at which those muscles move is very nerve dependent. So they did studies, sleep studies, where there were swimmers that just so happened to be in the sleep study, and they just so happened to start like randomly setting PRs in the pool, as because
Oh my gosh.
it's not that they got stronger, but their nervous system was primed for performance as they were sleeping more because of this unrelated study, and that extra sleep, it helped them reach their potential for what they're capable of. So we see little things like that, and then they replicated that same study. They took it to like all the other sports teams and watched them get faster and stronger and all this other stuff. But they would do it with basketball, and these basketball players, their shooting percentage would skyrocket. So
yeah, that's cool.
So not just the learning, but the performance. And then for me, I am a little stuck in that stigma of like just tough it out kind of thing. But and I love learning about sleep. I'm a sleep nerd. But I'm a little bit of a hypocrite with it. One of my biggest motivating factors for going to sleep isn't how I feel tomorrow, but my fear of like Alzheimer's down the road. So like
That's real. Yeah.
we know that brain shrinks at night and it gets a lymphatic bath, I believe is when the lymph fluid goes in and it clears away like the beta alanine plaque and all that good stuff. But I did not know about this. I saw those images that you shared with me with the brain the day before and the night after, or the day after.
Yeah.
That's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, I agree. And there's a great book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. You read that book and it will change your life because, I mean, it's his number one thing. I wrote something down because it's just so funny that the number one stress relief is sleep. The number one way to fight infection is sleep. The number one immunity for your body is sleep. The number one thing you can do for your brain is sleep. And we just got to get a situation where we get better at sleep, I think, in general for everybody.
Yeah, agreed. That awareness is coming around at the same time that technology and the entertaining social media is advancing as well. So the competition is intense. How do you talk? I feel like you might talk to your students about how important sleep is, and you talk to them about putting down if they've got cell phones, do they have cell phones?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. So
Well,
I'm
the research will tell us that anything, and this is true for you and I, for adults, for anybody, 60 minutes before you want to sleep, you cannot have light hitting your eyes. I'm talking about directly, like from a screen. The lights overhead is not a direct hit to your eye, but I know there's some people who are very intense about their sleep, and they even invest in those, I think they're red lights or something, where their house actually goes dim throughout the afternoon and evening.
Oh, nice.
But for you and I, I'm just like looking at a TV screen, looking at your phone, looking at your computer, any of that 60 minutes before you sleep, that's really detrimental to your health, and especially to your sleep. So I tell my students that's one thing. I'm a big believer in Andrew Huberman's podcast, and of course, anybody that follows him knows that he is all about first morning light and late evening light. And if you want to have a good sleep schedule and a sleep cycle, that's the number one thing you got to do. You got to get your body outside in the light in the first 2 hours in the morning, and you got to get outside in the light in the final 2 hours before the sun is set. And it helps set your body. It tells your body, your entire body's run on clocks. A little bitty, not like the tick, tick, tick with an hour hand, but we have, all of our cells have these clock mechanisms where they all are set to time. And it's so much of it is based on our sleep. And that is how we sort of reset that clock to get the right time every single day. So I tell my students, you got to get outside in the morning, you got to get outside in the evening, you got to be out there for 10 or 15 minutes at least. And I tell them to get rid of the screen. But you know, even having the phone nearby can disrupt your sleep for the kids, especially. If you or I were meeting right now in person and we were both sitting at a table together, if I had my phone next to me, even if I have it the volume off and upside down, there's some part of my brain that's checking, like, is the phone vibrating? Is it over there? We don't even realize it, but all those things factor in. So it's a thing with middle school kids. Their lifeline is that phone, and so it's really hard for them. So I don't want to scare them, but like you said about Alzheimer's, there's a lot of things that they're doing a disservice to themselves if they don't do what they can to get sleep. And I don't know how we're going to fix that. And you know, our middle school kids too have a different circadian rhythm where their clock shifts, and so their parents are ready to get that good night of sleep, but their middle schooler wants to be up until 10:30, 11:30, and that's part of their physiology also. They're just shifted, but our schools haven't shifted with them. In fact, typically our teenagers start school earlier than our little ones for lots of other practical reasons, sports and bus service and babysitting and everything else. But their clocks have shifted. They have a lot of things working against them to get a good night of sleep. But I'm not giving up. I keep talking about it.
You know, you said you don't want to scare them. I don't mind scaring them. I think we might have to. But they should be, you know, we should all be a little scared if we know about how far below our potential we will fall without a good night's sleep. The diseases that are waiting on the other side of poor sleep or if shift work is considered a carcinogen, is
Yes.
that it's disease and cancer causing or correlated, I guess I should say. But yeah, we've got to get that sleep. Have you ever heard, speaking of our caveman days, have you heard the theory of why different ages have different circadian rhythms?
Have you? I would love to hear. I'm just trying to guess. I can probably guess that the role of the adolescent in evolutionary times was to sort of take things over later in the evening, so the older people could get some much needed sleep. So I'm guessing that just helped us all as a species survive.
Yeah. So the idea, that's exactly the theory is that the idea is that young ones will want to go to sleep here. Middle schoolers go to sleep there, maybe high schoolers go to sleep there, and then as we get into adults, we're back in here, and then the older people in the tribe are going to go there, and then the babies are going to wake up throughout the night to alarm everyone. And so the idea was that you wouldn't have to assign who's going to be on watch, is because somebody in the tribe, I think they said the tribes would be like 40 people or so, that somebody in the tribe would always be awake and alert. If a lion or a saber-tooth tiger was going to come try and eat you, somebody would be able to shout for help and kind of alert the rest of the tribe. But that
makes sense.
And when I was in high school, my circadian rhythm was go to sleep very late, and then I wanted to sleep late, but instead I'd wake up and I'd go take a nap in class or something. Yeah, so that sleep knowledge is it's huge.
It is.
And speaking of Huberman, I also like him. Um, he's actually doing a collaboration with Matthew Walker right now, where they're going to release a I'm not sure, I don't know, 3 or 6 episodes of him and Matthew Walker,
Yeah, I think it's
and
5 or 6.
the subject matter is sleep. And
Hmm.
so yeah, if you're out there and you haven't read the book Why We Sleep, it's a good one. It it was on the tail end of a lot of sleep research I did, and
Yeah.
it consolidated a lot of the good stuff that I had learned along the way. Like just reading that book first could have saved me a whole bunch of trouble. Um, so I guess better late than never.
That's right.
For maybe, so we know that when we play, we learn, right? It facilitates that learning. There's the surprise and there's the practice and the repetition and things like that. What about when we don't, maybe we're not addicted to learning? It's like maybe you and I are just maybe you and I are just addicts, and that's why it's always the next certification. Or you get an email from a stranger saying his wife heard you speak and he wants to talk about, whatever the deal is. You and I have made the connection. What about students or whoever who has not made that connection? Maybe they need to study, and they're studying for a class that they're just not interested in. Any study tips for that scenario or otherwise?
Well, there's two different kind of questions there, because one is just the study tips in general. Once you've committed to, I know I need to study, how do I study? That's one kind of study tip. The idea of getting yourself even caring about studying, that the carrot that I sort of dangle in front of my students for that second idea is at their age. We know that the brain is starting to prune itself between the ages of 10 and 20, roughly. The brain is actually decreasing. It's getting rid of a lot of connections, which might sound frightening or terrible, but it's actually wonderful, because it's going to make the adult brain so much more efficient. And so between those ages of 10 and 20, their brain is looking around. Basically, what do I not need anymore? If I don't need that, I'm going to get rid of it. If I don't need that, I'm going to get rid of it. So I'm telling my students, this is when you're letting your brain know what to get rid of. And you got to be careful, because this is a chance when your brain is also wide open, willing to just, it is so changeable. Just throw something my way. Let me have something else to learn. And I tell them, the more variety of things they can learn, the more hooks they have to hang things on in the future. So I tell them, I no longer want to hear you come in my room and say that other class that I'm taking, I don't even know why I need that. I tell them, this is why you need it. Your brain is at a time in your life when the more things you feed it, the better you're going to be for the rest of your life. So I try to encourage that as far as the studying goes. But as far as study habits in general, any of us can do. I guess the key thing is to know that learning doesn't happen when someone tells you something. It doesn't happen when you read something. It doesn't happen when you see something. Learning happens when you retrieve. It's when you retrieve the information. That's when learning happens in the brain. And so you have to think of studying as retrieval practice. And what can I do to get better at retrieval? And a lot of students think they know the best way to study. There was a great book called Make It Stick, and it was written by professors from WashU right here in St. Louis who were studying how we learn. And in that book, they quote a lot of WashU students in different ways, but they talk about the students who, they asked them, how do you learn? And they said, I read the chapter again and again and again, and I highlight and I highlight and I read again and again. That's how I study. And then they did a study with those students and said, what if you try this way instead? Don't read and read and read, don't highlight, try this instead. And the students did better. They did better on the next assessment. And then they said, so what do you think? How do you learn best? They said, I read and I read and I read and I highlight. It didn't even go in. But the idea is that if we want to learn something, really learn it, it's a little harder, because if we're just reading, we're giving ourselves a false sense of security. We're not really learning anymore. Doing that, it just feels better. And true learning doesn't always feel good or easy, because true learning should make your brain work a little harder. So instead, you read that chapter once, and then you leave it alone for several hours, maybe even a day. And the next day, you just sit down, you write for 5-10 minutes, everything you can recall from that chapter. That does not feel as good as rereading the chapter the next day, but you start to realize how much you did retain, but you also realize I know there was a middle section there that I am blank on. I don't even know what that said. Well, then you go back and that's the part you look back at the chapter. That's the part you read again. Another way you can do it is it's great to teach other people. So it's wonderful. There's a lot of these studies how the oldest child in the family actually ends up having a higher IQ. And people used to think it was because, well, they were around only adults for the first few years. That's why they have, no, it's because they were teaching the siblings so much. And we know that teaching is such a great thing for our brain. So tell a classmate, tell somebody else about the chapter, tell them what you got out of it. You can make up questions about the chapter and ask them. Index cards are not a bad thing, but we use those incorrectly also. If you have index cards, if you have to do a lot of vocab or something, it's great to just go through the index cards, but you make two piles. I knew this right away, put it in that pile. I didn't know this, put it in that pile. And then ignore the one I knew right away and go back to the other pile, go back again, but not forever. Later on, a few days later, go back and get the first pile. The thing is, we have to put a gap between our learning also. But how long should the gap be? That's the $1,000,000 question. And no one knows that for sure, and no one can tell you for sure. It depends what you're learning, what kind of learner you are. But you read that chapter, the next day you write a little bit about it, go back and see what you forgot, and then let it go for 2 more days. Then go back and ask questions about it or tell somebody. It's that gap that makes it just a little tougher to retain or to recall. But the difficulty of recall is what really locks in the learning. So you can certainly cram the night before a test and read the chapter 4 or 5 times. And if that's your goal, is to do well on the test and never know it again, then maybe that's what you're going to do. But if you want to retain anything from that chapter, the cramming isn't going to do it. A week later, you're going to know less than 80% of what you read in that chapter. You do it this other way, it actually takes less time. I'm blanking on the guy's name right now of the book I just read by him, but he talked about doing that in college. He said this method he learned about, Cal Newport is his name, Cal Newport. He talked about this great system he had in college. He discovered this without anybody really telling him, that if he read the chapter, stepped away, wrote about it, asked questions, went back, he said he got so good at learning throughout the semester and he retained it for so long that when it came time for finals, just to be social, he would fake that he needed to study and go hang out in the library with other people. But he didn't need to study because he had used these techniques all semester long, and it made his finals week so much less stressful because it just retained the learning for the whole semester for him.
Yeah, gosh, you got a few things to throw back at you. One is to talk about my own education journey a little bit. So I'm kind of, or at one time was bright, and I never the best speller. So in elementary school, when spelling came up, if we had 4th grade, if we had a spelling test of like 10 words, I would take each word and write it like 100 times or just something ridiculous, and I would memorize it. And to this day, I'm still a poor speller. So it helped to get through the test, but the learning kind of was missing, and maybe it's just not my strong suit. Am I allowed to say that? Can I say that's not my strong suit?
Well, you can, and I will tell you, it's very common among gifted kids. Spelling is an issue with gifted kids. It's across the board. Research proves that. I always say I think a gifted person invented spell check because they struggle with spelling.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, so I at least have one marker still standing. And then the second one is we've been talking about play and learning. And it just made me think of this. I love the movie Catch Me If You Can. It's got Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hanks in it. And the con artist is Frank Abagnale Jr.
Right.
And I was reading about him, and one thing that didn't make the movie, probably wouldn't have been that cool to be in the movie, is I guess he got a job teaching at the University of Utah, or maybe one of those schools in Utah, I believe. And he was teaching a sociology class. And so he did the thing where he like creates a pretend certificate or degree, and then he knocks on the door of the dean, and he's this con man, smooth talker, or whatever it is. But he gets a job. He's a con man who can make millions of dollars and forge checks, but he cons his way into teaching a college class. Probably not the most lucrative position on the planet. but he did it because he wanted to learn a little bit more about sociology. And so the day before class each week or twice a week or whatever, he would read the chapter they're going to go over. And so he did it to force himself to learn something
Oh
he
my
was interested
gosh.
in already.
Yeah,
So some of the
there you
things
go.
you said, that story just jumped in my mind, and it's a better story than I have any about me. So I thought I'd just like sneak it in there. And then when you were just talking recently, you said it kind of depends on what kind of learner you are. Can you can you talk to us about learning styles, or how do we know what we are, or what's the deal?
There's no such thing as learning styles. I can tell you that. That's a myth. So there's a great book by Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa. It's called Neural Myths, and she lists 69 different neural myths. And one of the big ones is that there's such a thing as learning styles. So that's been promulgated by a lot of publishing companies. It is true that there's different things that lend themselves to learning in certain modes, but you might say, I'm a visual learner. And then I might say, well, then do you not enjoy going to concerts and hearing the music? Because we all have all of our learning styles. To tell a student to pigeonhole them and let a student think that I'm visual, I'm kinesthetic, I'm auditory, it sort of it puts a limitation on our students that we don't need to put on them. There are certain subjects that lend themselves more to being taught in a certain way, obviously. If I need to learn how to play basketball, I can read about it. I can listen to someone, but just going out and playing is going to make a difference for me. And that's true if I'm looking at art. I got to be more visual. So certain subject matters lend themselves to different ways of presenting the information. But it is not true that any of us have a learning style. And I hear that among my own colleagues. They'll say, well, he's really a visual learner, so give him everything in writing. And I think that's not fair to him. Our brains are multimodal all the time. So we need to learn through a variety of pathways. The best thing we do for our students and ourselves is find multiple ways into the brain. So we cannot just think about one thing at all. But we are different. And when I say we're different types of learners, there's different things that possibly excite us, different things that are going to surprise me. Things are going to surprise you that won't surprise me, and vice versa. There's different things that I'll just feel more comfortable learning about because maybe I've got a different background in it in some way. But and our brains are all so unique, obviously. But I would say we have to be careful about learning styles.
Okay.
I
So
was actually offered to teach a course a few years ago on learning styles, and I said I cannot, in good conscience, teach that course because there's no such thing.
it, you could have saved yourself a lot of trouble, just one day, class for one day and class dismissed.
That's
Um,
right.
so, so elementary school, the only thing I have to study is I do rote memorization of spelling. And then through middle and high school, I still didn't really have to study, not because I was so smart, but it kind of got to the point that I had decided that I was going to join the army, and that school was just a place I was going until that
Yep.
occurred. And then at the end of high school, I had an older brother who went through the Air Force. He enjoyed it, but what he told me about it convinced me that it wasn't the right path for me. So then I find myself, oh gosh, I haven't really been trying. I haven't really been trying
Right.
in school for the last 5 or 6 years. Um, Maybe circle back to you telling your students you don't know what you're going to need in the future, so
Right.
just learn it. Um, so high school ends. I did okay, some A's, some B's, some C's. I did all right, and then I had to I knew that I wanted to be a personal trainer was my next step, and they send you a nice textbook, and you pay money to take a test. I'd never knew you had to pay money to take tests. This what what a racket this is. Um, so I pay money. Could have got like a little beat up car for the amount of money you pay for some of these personal training
Mm-hmm.
tests. Um, so now studying is all of a sudden really, really important for the first time in my life. And I didn't know how to do it. Nobody ever told me how to study.
Yeah.
They told me to study, but nobody ever told me any strategies or anything like that. So I just started spending time with it. And I kind of lurk with it, but it's for the first time that I'm doing the flashcards, I'm doing the notes, I'm rewatching things. I'm doing everything, but I don't have a thing, a way that I do it. And then you fast forward. So I did some certifications, I did some degrees, and you fast forward. Now I know how to study, and the way that I study would be like my most recent degree I finished in 2018, and I took it's the National Counselor Exam. It's the
Okay.
NCE. So, and for this, you have subject matter, and I make a PowerPoint, and I put like a concept or a phrase or whatever it is, a term, and I explain what it is on that PowerPoint slide, and then I put the most ridiculous imagery to go
Mm,
with it.
yeah,
And so I learned there's a book called Moonwalking with Einstein, which
I've
is
heard of
about
it.
it's an easy read,
Okay, I'm
and
writing it down.
it teaches you how to play with your own thoughts a little bit to make things more concrete. So my practice with the certifications and with the degrees led me, and then reading that book led me to the end of my really structured degree chasing education, is that I just create a PowerPoint, you know, slide after slide after slide with a concept, and then something ridiculous to go with it, something that entertains me, something that I'm probably not going to show to other people, but it just makes those concepts so easy to remember. And so we
Yeah,
talk all this. We've been talking about play. We've been talking about learning styles. We've been talking about everything else. For me, if I would have known to make PowerPoints and to put ridiculous, silly, or just really memorable things to go with it, to pair it as a mnemonic device, I think
right.
is the way they call it.
Yes.
For me, I'll memorize anything if you give me enough time and let me make a bunch of ridiculous slides. So that was my conclusion to my learning styles and my experiments with studying.
Well, I think what you did, you have electronic flashcards there, basically, and a mnemonic device combined together, and you were interested in the topic and saw a purpose. I think it's fair that our kids need to have a purpose for whatever they learn, our students. I think all that goes together. And you were basically, by getting those PowerPoint slides ready, you were kind of preparing. You could have taught from those slides, most likely. And it was another one of those devices for learning. So I think that's a cool combination. Good for you.
Yeah. So if young Mitch had access to that stuff, maybe that would have helped him out. But
Well, a lot of our gifted kids struggle because, like you're describing, they aren't challenged early on. It's not anyone's fault. They just aren't. They come into the beginning of the school year, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and they already get it. The unfortunate thing is that we learn that capacity for grit gets developed by about third grade. So a lot of these kids don't need the grit in school before third grade. And so they are sort of at a disadvantage because when the learning does get more difficult, they are lost. They have no idea what to do, where their peers have been struggling and learning and developing that grit for years. So it's an important thing, and it's important just to call that out and make them aware, because it doesn't feel good not to know something. And sometimes those gifted kids will avoid because they don't like how it feels not to know something.
grit by third grade, where does that come from? What can you share with us about that? Because I work with a bunch of coaches, not right now, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, but it's very common to say this is being done for mental toughness. It's like, are you sure that a long run is going to develop mental toughness? Because it seems like it's maybe not doing that. So,
Well, we can always
um,
develop grit. I mean, you and I can get better we can get grittier, as Duckworth says. You can get grittier about things, but I just think it's a natural part of your development by about 8 years of age that if you struggled and succeeded and struggled and succeeded, you just get that gritty attitude. If you've never had to struggle at something and then suddenly you do and you've never had to, you are lost. You don't know what to do. And too often, I think a lot of our gifted kids find themselves in that situation. But I'm not going to tell somebody else what does or does not give them more mental toughness. But you know what? I'm going to talk about something, though, that I think was really important. And I wanted to mention this to you, and maybe you've already heard about this. But do you know about the anterior mid-singular cortex? I hardly ever mention a certain part of the brain. This is not just like a typical, conversation, but you have, so you know what I'm talking about.
I have recently heard about it, and I think it's awesome. Please talk about it.
Okay, so we all have it in our brain. We all have the anterior mid-singular cortex. What its job is for when we encounter a moment, when we have faced a challenge and we have to make a decision whether to power through, to go forward, to do it. You finish a run and then you decide, I think I'm going to do sprints for another 2 minutes, or you finish a run, but I'm going to do that hill workout really quick, or whatever. And it might be a verbal thing. I've been wanting to have this conversation. I really want to mention this thing. And you power through. The point is the power through part. If you come to that point where you don't want to keep going, but you do keep going, your anterior mid-singular cortex literally grows when you do that. When you encounter that moment when you could push on, but you choose not to, it shrinks. And the cool thing they found out is that they studied this group called superagers, which is a poor choice of phrasing for those people because it makes it sound like they age quickly. But what they mean is these are people who are in their 90s, but who are still active. Maybe they're still biking. They still have a big social life. They're mentally so with it. They're the superagers. When they study them, they have these huge anterior mid-singular cortex. So that's something waiting for us. And I've told my students about that. I drew it on the board one day because we were doing some kind of a project that was really tough and they just wanted to quit. And I said, this is one of those moments. You push through here, you work hard and get through this, you're going to grow that. And when you grow it, it makes the next time you need to call on that for a reserve, it's there. So I think, and it's constantly changing. It's always at our disposal, but it's always, we can choose to make it grow or we can choose to not let it grow. And that's a daily thing. But it's kind of a nice thing when I'm at the end of a run or some kind of a workout and I've got to just do a little more of a sprint or something and I don't really want to, then I'll just tell myself, but if I do, I'm going to grow the anterior mid-singular cortex. I will actually tell myself that, and then I'll power through and do it. And then it just feels so good on several levels, but I know that I've done something that is really important for my brain and for long term.
Yeah. What a fun recent discovery, maybe we'll call it that. I love it for a bunch of reasons, and another thing that I understand about it is it grows when you do hard things, and it grows when you do not do easy things. When you say no to cake or you say no to sleeping in, we know we need sleep, but so it also grows doing just choosing the harder path. So I love it for a lot of reasons. It's very exciting. And then for that grittiness, like we were talking about developing it, as a parent, obviously I don't want to cross the line, but I like to challenge my children. And like I'm trying to, because we give them the opportunity to do organized sports and to do ballet and dance and wrestling. We're giving them the opportunity to find what they like.
Yeah.
But if they don't find those things, and if they're not pushing and challenging each other or challenging themselves, I feel responsibility to challenge them. I'm not going to spoon feed them nonstop. I'm the youngest of four, and so I had the little brother struggles. You're not, there's the first several years of your life, you're never the fastest or the strongest or the best at anything. You're always trying. And my oldest child, my daughter, she doesn't have anybody to race up a hill with, and maybe that person reaches over and pushes her back a little bit or something like that. She doesn't. So I try to give her a little of that taste of what it's like to have a little frustration. And they see that, there's a Michael Phelps, his coach, I'm gonna say it was Bob Bowerman. There's a famous track coach. I always get him and a famous track coach.
I think he's a track guy. I don't remember.
Okay. So there's something, their last name is similar. I'll put it up on the screen, and I'll do 10 push-ups for forgetting. But Michael Phelps would show up to practice and he'd say, drive home and come back. Or right before his race, his coach would reach over and break his goggles. Or he'd say, he'd tell him, race this, and then you're going to have a rest time of 10 minutes or 30 minutes. And then his real rest time is cut in half. As he would torture him in a productive way.
Yeah. Yeah.
To make him expect the unexpected. And then there's the story of him finishing a race and winning gold when his goggles had filled up with water and he was swimming with his eyes closed, basically. And he talks about, well, I've been trained for this. I haven't been trained in a perfect scenario. And even though I love my children more than life, there are times that I think, like, maybe I'll just agitate them a little bit. I'm going to make them a little uncomfortable right now. And obviously not trying to cross the line, but there are times that I'm trying to nurture a little bit of that toughness. I was a personal trainer for many years, and I would see that people who were in athletics as children, they would take to exercise and pushing themselves much easier than the average non-youth athlete.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that they were in better shape. Some of them were, but the same like shape to the eye and strength levels, their conditioning was about the same, but their brain knew that it was okay to have your heart pounding and to have a dry mouth and to have muscles burning. But in my experience, limited experience, very few of the people who did not do youth sports had that comfort with being uncomfortable. They didn't know that it was safe or that it was okay. They didn't know that all the hard stuff is where you reap the rewards. And now there's plenty of exceptions. So I can think of several clients who were total monsters, and they didn't know youth sports, but when you put them in, you gave them a green light to go, and they were just amazing. So it's not an across the board rule, but it is definitely a pattern, if you will.
No, I've seen the same thing. We actually talked about that the other day. I think people who did engage in sports in some way when they were kids just have a different attitude, because other people, I have adult friends, they go out for a run and they think, I better quit. I better stop right here. I'm sweating. I think, so what? You're sweating. But it's an unusual feeling for them. And so they just shut down, because it's not anything against them. They're going to be fine, but it's what we grow up with. So, I wouldn't cut your kids' goggles off when they go swimming, but I think it's great that you're aware of that. And I will tell you, though, I also tell my parents when I give talks to gifted parents, I think it's really important for our kids to stick it out and do what they committed to. Yeah, talk to gifted parents. Sorry. And we need our kids to commit to things. It's important. It's a life skill. You said you're going to play on this team. You're going to play on the team. But I would also say that sometimes, and this is what parenting becomes more of an art than a science, sometimes it's also okay to quit. And that's kind of a revolutionary term, idea. There's a guy in gifted ed named Ian Byrne who talks about this very thing. Sometimes it's okay to quit, but that's a really fine line you have to walk. And I usually tell the parents, if your child's committed to something, especially if others are relying on that commitment, they signed up for the team. The team has this many players. They need this many players. I'm sorry you're not enjoying the soccer team, but they're counting on you to finish the season. You've got to stick it out and finish the season. Then I think that's fair to teach them the responsibility. But other times, they've given violin 3 years and they're just sick of violin, and you can't just say, you must stick it out. Why? Then sometimes you can just quit. As adults, we do that sometimes. We sign up for something we're going to do. We decide we're going to do this or that. And then we just quit. And I just think it sounds maybe like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth, but I think sometimes we need to give our kids the opportunity to quit. It's a revolutionary thought. Not always, sometimes.
Depends on if I like what they're doing or not. We'll see.
I know sometimes the things our kids do, that's part of our social life too. Like, what do you mean you're not going to go to softball? I love sitting with those parents at every softball game. Keep playing.
You mentioned that or I did. I guess we have alluded to some of the aging brain a little bit. Do you have any comments or clarity on what's going on with the brain as it ages? Any advices to keep our brain young and high functioning?
I think we talked about some of them already, and I'll confess that I'm far from an expert on anything, but I'm really not an expert on the aging brain. But I do know it's a misnomer to just assume that things happen because you get older. I don't buy that. I don't think that's just, well, that's how he is. He's 75. Well, no, I reject that. I think you can be as young as you want to be with your brain, and there's things we can do right now at any age leading up to there, like getting the right amount of sleep and nutrition, obviously, and exercise, keeping the stress levels where they need to be. I think all that's important. It's like a long-term investment in your account. But I think that a lot of our older people struggle with sleeping too. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think there's something going on when they're going to bed at crazy hours and getting up at crazy hours, and then they end up having some kind of mental health issue. I think that all ties together. Again, we're coming back to sleep. I'm a broken record here. But I do think there's things we can do throughout our lives, obviously, to keep our brains young. I teach my sixth graders how to play bridge. We play the card game bridge on a regular basis, and there's a lot of research on how wonderful bridge is, and it's never too late to learn that. But it's social, it's cognitive, it gets you in a habit to do certain things on a regular basis. Obviously, social. We are meant to be social creatures. If you go back again to our thousands of years ago, no one was meant to live in isolation. And I think when we do, that ages the brain much more quickly than it needs to age. So I think most of all, we just have to get rid of this whole notion that once you hit a certain age, you're going to be more forgetful. I reject that. And I think sometimes we subconsciously are looking for that. So when you're 75 years old and you can't find your keys for a moment, well, 25-year-olds can't find their keys for a moment too. But when you're 75, you right away assume, oh my gosh, it must be my dementia, it must be starting, here it goes. So I think we're kind of feeding that, and we're looking for it, and I don't think that's fair. So I just think you got to just stay really, really active socially and physically and mentally all the time. I think we have to also be careful, because I think a lot of our old people are sold a bill of goods about how buy this app and play it on your phone and you'll be young forever. And that's so crazy, because playing that one little app that helps you sort something is going to make your brain really good at sorting something in that little app. It's not going to make your brain overall young. You just have to keep a lot of variety. I talked about how our brains are pattern seekers. Something else we haven't talked about is the power of prediction. I think prediction is underutilized as a studying technique, as a technique in our lives for our brain. Our brains love to be successful in predictions. It is such a jolt of dopamine when we make a prediction and it comes true. So I think that's really cool. And we can set that up for ourselves, for anything. You can be watching something on you're streaming something on Netflix and you're watching some show and you think, I bet she goes over to that guy next, or whatever. Make a prediction. And it might come true, it might not. But those are really good little techniques we can do all the time. When you're reading a book or when you're anything, prediction is really fun. And I do it a lot. It also helps us become more aware of our own thinking. I have my students, and I would suggest this to your college students. I always, when they take any kind of a short quiz or anything else, I always say, predict how many you think you got right on that quiz, whatever it might be. It's just a great thing to do. It's metacognitive. It helps you think about how much do I really know about this topic? And it is really exciting when the prediction comes true. As a teacher, it's more exciting to me if I gave you a 10-question quiz and you think I got 8 of these right, and you got 8 of them right. I think that tells me a lot more than if you got 10 right and thought you got 7 right. I need to know that you know about your own learning. So I think prediction is pretty cool.
I think we've all yelled out answers to Jeopardy at home.
That's right.
So yeah, it's fun to win and it's fun to be right about things. Is like I think we all kind of we want to be right, whether we admit it or not. I think it's just more fun that way.
Well, and can I tell you, it's also important to be wrong. And I'm going to tell you a whole different take on that. Oh my gosh, how often do we hear, let yourself make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, blah, 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 blah. But here's the thing we know now. when you find out something's wrong, when you find out something you thought was right is wrong, you wrote an answer down, or you thought this person starred in that show, whatever it was, the moment you find out that what you thought was right is wrong, that moment, your brain goes into a heightened level of attention instantly. And so your brain is actually more wired for learning in the moments following that realization than it was 5 minutes before. So when people say mistakes are good for you, they're not just saying a platitude. Honestly, your brain is different when you make a mistake, and your brain is like extra hungry for learning in those moments following, which is why mistakes are so cool. In my classroom, that will happen. The kids will make a mistake, a very public mistake in front of all their classmates. And then I will say to them, oh my gosh, lucky you, because right now your brain is fired up. Your brain is so ready for the learning that's about to happen. So I just wanted to throw that in there because I love talking about that.
Yeah. In third grade, we were doing the spelling bee, like in the classroom, and you know how you win the classroom and then you go in front of the school, and I misspelled the word package. I'll never forget.
I'm that way with fourth grade. Judgment. That was my word. Okay. Judgment. I'll never forget it.
Speaking of judgment, middle school, the gifted class, we had a game called The Judge. Do you guys have that?
No.
I was going to bring it up, but now I don't have to forget because you said judgment. There was a game in a briefcase. You'd put the briefcase in the middle of the table. All the players, maybe like 8 or 10 players, would sit on the same side of the table or around it or something. You open up the briefcase, and all these little, about the size of a cell phone with a wire connection to the briefcase, and that was your buzzer.
Oh my gosh.
And the teacher or whoever would ask a question, and you'd buzz in.
Yeah.
The briefcase had these little diodes on it. You could see who buzzed in first, and then you could compete. So you could play trivia games in class with this game called The Judge. And
that's funny.
That was one of my fond memories from middle school class. Right. So
high tech back then too, I'm sure.
Big time, yeah, cutting edge. Podcast is the Winning Wellness Podcast, and that's sort of a two-pronged approach. One is that some people are not well; they need to win back their wellness, and then they can pursue other goals after that. And then the other population, they're well, they're fit, they are pursuing, whether they're pursuing more muscle or fat loss, or they're trying to score a touchdown, or whatever it is. Do you have any tips for winning well or winning your wellness?
Gosh. Besides sleeping, actually, I think we haven't talked about this much at all, and it gets a little, but I'm not sure what the word is, but dopamine's a big deal. Obviously, we know that helps with our learning, and there's things we can do to boost that in like really easy, fun ways. One thing we haven't really talked about at all is the idea of non-sleep deep rest. Just the idea of it's a kind of meditation, but I think it's important to just be still. And I talk about the thing called the power of the pause. You may have heard of this before because the athletes talk about this. After any kind of a workout or a game or anything else, if you just pause for 5 minutes and not really do anything else, don't get out your phone, just pause. Your brain will, without you even telling it to, rehearse what you just did at about the 20 times speed. So you finish a workout and you just sit, and that is the hardest thing sometimes. But I don't think we spend enough time doing nothing. And I think sometimes after a learning bout, after a workout, it's really important to spend about 5 minutes. Just lay in the grass. It doesn't matter. Just do nothing, just to sit and let yourself just be. And actually, that's really good for your brain. Periodic pauses are really important throughout learning, any kind of learning bout. But I think it's also great for athletes to take advantage of that, because your brain will rehearse what it's just learned, and it will rehearse it again and again and again and again at really fast speed. And that's just going to help you be more successful in the future. And it's 5 minutes. So everybody's got 5 minutes. I think we need to spend more time. I couldn't cite the exact research now, but there's somewhere I recently read 30 minutes a day is your goal. And that's 30 minutes of doing nothing. And it doesn't have to be 30 minutes in a row. It can be 2 minutes here, 5 minutes there. You can spend that time with your eyes open or shut. But the point is to just try to do nothing. Some people do a focused meditation where they're thinking about something specifically. Some purposely try to think about nothing, which is also harder to do than you might think. But regardless, it's just sitting still. Eyes closed, eyes open, like I said. But I think there's a lot to be said. There's two things under our control. Nothing else in the world, but these two things are under our complete control. Are you so excited to hear what they are? It's what you pay attention to and how much effort and energy you decide to give it. That's it. Nothing else is 100% under our control. But I can always choose what I pay attention to. And then I can decide whether I want to give it this amount of effort or this amount of effort. And I think that's a good feeling to have as well. Whether you're a student or a parent or a teacher or anything else, just think about that. What are you choosing to pay attention to and choosing not to pay attention to? And I think that, and then just pausing more often, would be some of my tips for being well and winning well. Is just let yourself be still now and then.
Yeah, excellent. That's one that hits home. Definitely, I find myself sometimes like in that car drive. Let's turn the audiobook or the podcast off. Like, let's get some quiet time. Let's get a brain break in. And then just throw in a quote, if you will. I actually interviewed him. He's one of my mentors, so he was one of my earliest interviews on this podcast. Maybe that might be episode 4 with Ira Baldwin, and he was saying that he kind of like, he would chuckle at it. He'd say, "You get what you pay for, so pay attention." And,
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard a guy say, where attention flows, energy goes. Yeah. Same thing. I love that. Pay attention.
And then my last question is, are there any questions I have not asked you, but I should have?
Oh, gosh. We don't have time for all that. No, I'm kidding. This is not a question, but I just want to put this last thing in. Years ago at a parent-teacher conference, I had a parent say, there's really only 2 things I ask any of my kids to do, and that's show up and be interested. And I love that advice for life. I feel like show up, I mean, in the truest sense of the word, show up. Be there, be all in wherever you are, be all in and be there. So show up and then be interested. I tell my students there's no such thing as an uninteresting subject, but there are uninteresting people who are uninterested in the subject. And I don't want to be one of those people. So that's why I try to always be curious and show up. So maybe that's my closing thing. I can't think of anything else you should have asked me. It's been wonderful. It's been wonderful chatting with you. I love it.
Thank you so much. And I have a feeling people are going to really enjoy this episode and what you bring so much to the table. If anyone wants to bother you or reach out or connect, would that be all right? And how would they go about that?
Well, I have a personal email. I've got an email that's just about my brain, my brain people. It's just know the brain you teach. That's my own email that I talk only about brain with that. But also my personal email is fine too. I'm just Denise M. Ford. They're both at gmail.com. Okay. So just know the brain you teach is important to me, I think, on different levels. So yeah, they're welcome to reach out and chat.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being a resource, not only for us, but I know that you are putting effort into helping out other teachers. That's how my wife came across you, and she was right as usual to tell me to reach out to you. So, another one that she's right about. So, thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording now. Okay. But if you don't mind just talking for another minute.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you so much for listening to our Winning Wellness podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions for podcast guests or topics, you can submit those through YouTube comments. You can message me on Instagram. My handle is Mitch Schwartzman, or you can email me at coachmitchschwartzman@gmail.com.